hit today. They're gonna feel today. Come what may, the Cubs are gonna win today. Hey, hey, holy mackerel, no doubt about it. The Cubs are on their way.
A Conversation with John Conenna is sponsored in part by Health Markets Insurance, your specialist for health, Medicare, small group, life, and supplemental. See our specialist, Maximilian Bujowski, for your insurance need. He is located at 7418 West Belmont Avenue in Chicago. Again, Health Markets is a proud sponsor of A Conversation with John Conenna. And now on to our episode. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Today we are totally honored to have on John St.Augustine, best-selling author, radio personality, writer, and motivational speaker. His books of note are 21st Century Dads, Living Uncommon Life, Every Moment Matters, Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting, Love Your God, Create Your Life, and I think about three more, and these are the ones that I've dabbled on. But today is one that is very special. I had a great chance to meet him through a mutual friend, Ray Borgard, and Raymond had me reach out to John, and John Everett since that day has been very gracious with me from start to finish. The book we're going to talk about today is The IRONMAN, about the great legendary catcher of the Chicago Cubs, Randy Hundley. This is just phenomenal. On August 20th, Mr. St. Augustine had a book signing where Randy was there and about over 200 people in a restaurant on Irving and Pulaski called La Villa. It was a day I'll never forget. I met some of his greatest friends, sat with them, broke bread with them. But to see the legendary catcher, goosebumps, I think, from the minute I walked in to the minute I walked out. So, John, good morning. And I have to ask you the first question. What is going on with you, young man?
First of all, we're pretty close to the same age, so we're both young men.
Yeah.
We got to call it that. And just to be clear, some of those books I just wrote the forward to. My books are Phenomenon, Living an Uncommon Life, Every Moment Matters. And then I'm a ghostwriter actually for 6 other books. And this will be the 7th book that I've done. But this is the first time collaborating with somebody like Randy. Has just been, and we're just getting underway. As you mentioned, August 20th, we had this huge book launch at La Villa, best Italian restaurant in Chicago. You would know,
Yeah.
my friend.
I'm feeling it.
You did well. I was watching you. And it's just been a long time in the making. So the book is literally just starting to find its legs, really just now starting to do media. So we appreciate the time.
Oh, this is fantastic. Thank you for coming on this morning. I have to ask you, there's always that one athlete or that one person or something that sticks out in your mind. Like for me, being a big hockey guy, and of course, for me being a big Chicago Cub fan when I was younger, take us through that beginnings of Randy Hundley, because there was a great story that day at La Villa on how you met him off of Berthoud Avenue here in Chicago. Yeah. And so, I mean, I want to kind of dig into that first part, and we'll get into the book a little bit. Just to recollect that story, because that story is, I had water in my eyes.
Well, you'll excuse me if that happens here, because I cannot tell this story without getting emotional, John.
Yes.
So as a kid, I grew up originally near like Western and Belmont, and where Riverview used to be, the amusement park. And I lived there for my early years, so about 1966, and we moved from there to the Berthoud Avenue address. And a guy that was my best buddy on Fletcher Street over by Western and Belmont, we used to play catch in my yard, and he was Fergie Jenkins and I was Randy Hundley. I didn't even have a glove. I had a hat, and I took the hat off and I'd catch the rubber ball with it. We did this forever. So when I moved from there, it was a little difficult, but pretty soon I realized that the Cubs stopped at Berthoud and Keeler, excuse me, which is the last stop before they would get on the outbound Kennedy to their suburban homes. And, 68, 69, it was just getting hot as it could get. And when that 69 team rolled around and we would stand on that corner with Cubs fever, brother, it was electric. And so there's actually a chapter in my second book, Every Moment Matters, called The Corner. and it recounts everything that happened that day back in 1970s, was the year after the 69 team, when Hundley actually pulled up on the corner in his red Corvette, said Cup 9 on the plates. I was the only kid at the corner. It was a rainout game against the Expos, and I was 0 for 3. No autographs, no high fives, nothing.
Yeah.
But and I'm getting ready to leave, and here comes Randy in this. Man, I'm getting goosebumps right now. Here
Right.
comes Randy in this Corvette, and the window comes down. You know, he's got such a distinctive drawl. You know, that Virginia drawl. He says,
Yes.
"Hey boy, what in the Sam Hill are you doing out in the rain?" And I said, "I just want an autograph." You know, so I get in the car. So I got in the car, and he signed my mitt and a couple other things. And he said, now, where do you live? And I said, just a couple blocks down. Now get home for supper. I mean,
Wow.
like he was my dad. You couldn't do that today.
No way.
You know, that none of that would ever happen today. But that was the closeness that team had with Chicago. They were like our fathers in many ways, right?
Yes. And I got to tell you, John,
Yeah.
when I was listening to the story sitting down at the table at La Villa that night, when you said it's pouring out, I'm drenched, I'm just about to walk home, and here comes this Corvette.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom, as I was growing up in Norridge, Illinois, not too far from that place,
Yeah.
the destiny of you and Randy Hundley.
That's where it started, man.
Yeah.
So how do you figure? So there's that. You know, a lot of kids had an experience similar, but maybe not getting in the car, but that part. 23 years later, my first paid writing assignment, and I didn't even know I could write back then, was to cover the Randy Hundley fantasy camps for Chicago Sports Profile magazine, which is long gone. I didn't even know how it happened, who talked me into it, how I talked to them. But John, I got paid $250 to go to UIC and Wrigley Field and play baseball with our heroes: Beckert, Banks, Kessinger, Williams, Fergie, the whole drill. And of course, Hundley started those camps. So and here comes Goosebumps number 2. I got to tell you, it's just so prominent in my mind. So I go to that camp, and I'm getting ready to cover it. And you walk into the locker room, and there's your jerseys hanging there. And I'm a catcher from high school and college, and I can't wait. And I see Randy, and I walk up and introduce myself, and I said, "Coach, do you remember the time in 1970? It's pouring rain, man. I'm ready to leave in the Corvette." I'd go through the whole thing. He goes, "Start running, rookie." That was his response, to start running. So of course, that was how it began. And we had a great camp. I actually hit a grand slam at UIC Field.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was, I'm still living off it. I'm okay with that. But that Saturday, we went to Wrigley to play, and there was about 500 people. They let your family in and such. And I'll never forget this, John. Larry Bittner's pitching at this point. So you play like a 7-inning game against the pros.
The old first baseman, yeah.
Yeah. And so Larry Bittner's, he's pitching while he's smoking on the mound. It was great. But when I got up, they realized there was some lumber here, and your friend and mine, Rich Nye,
the lefty.
The lefty comes in from outfield, and I never saw another pitch. Just wham, wham, wham. Randy's like, "Grab some pine, boy." So that story set this thing up. And about a month later, Hundley calls me and says, "Great, that's fantastic. We've been friends ever since." And I've had an incredible career in radio and broadcasting and speaking. And I've had an opportunity to take Randy kind of with me on the ride. One of the things that comes to mind, I developed Oprah's XM satellite radio network back in the mid-2000s. And one of the shows I produced was the Dr. Oz show. And I could bring any guest on that I wanted. So at one point, when Oz was actually in the studio in Chicago, I had Randy and Ron Santo come in and talk about baseball injuries. Of course, Ronnie talked about playing with diabetes and that all those kind of things. And it was so interesting to me because Oz is a New York guy. He's a Yankee guy. He knows baseball, but he doesn't know Cubs baseball. So after about 5 minutes, he's like, I got nothing. So I carried the show for the next hour with these guys. And afterwards, I walked him to the door and the whole deal. And Ron says, give Ron Jr., which I kind of knew Ronnie anyway, but give him your phone number because you don't have to pay for Cub tickets ever again.
Oh,
and he stayed true to his words. For the next 3 years, I had the best seats in the house, man. It was great.
Incredible. I mean, what a story, what a thing that had happened. And like you say, you took over that show because he didn't know that Chicago root of Chicago baseball, right?
And they're kind of, Mets fans and Yankee fans, all fans in every market are rabid for their guys, but you can't not look at that 1969 team, literally starting in 66 through 72, 73, that DeRocher, for better or for worse, built. right? I mean, he's the guy that took a Fergie out of the bullpen. Fergie stays in the bullpen. I don't think he's a Cy Young Award winner. So all these things are mixed in there. So we've been friends for decades, and then a year and a half ago, right before Randy's 80th birthday, and I'd been telling him, listen, brother, you should do something about a book, even if I don't write it. There's a bunch of guys that would love to tell your story because he has a great story. And so literally right after his 80th birthday, he calls me, he says, well, time to write that book, don't you think? And I'm thinking, could you wait till you're 90? I mean, come on, you're 80 years old. So he's pretty spry, as you can tell from being at that event. He's still got a lot of fire in him.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so we started the process, John. And, I mentioned that day that there's a great book called Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. This could have been called Wednesdays with Randy. Because
of course.
Every Wednesday for about 6 months, we'd go to breakfast. He'd get mobbed by Cubs fans. We'd talk about the book, go back to his house. I'd turn on all the fancy audio equipment, and he would talk for hours about everything and more. And it was like sacred ground for me. You got to remember, John, that Corvette's still in the driveway.
I heard that. Yeah, I heard that day we were at the thing. I have to ask you, I mean, when he accepts this thing, hey, we're going to write this book and everything else, you saw the passion in this man still about this 1966, playing to the Cubs till 73, going to Minnesota, and then coming back for the song at the end. I mean, he really, I mean, and we'll get into 69 a little bit too. You saw that this man was just really like, it was heart and soul, correct?
100%. How he played the game, which was ferocious, is how he attacked this book project. It was ferocious as well. So while we're at breakfast, it's all well and good. And he's got the hat on and the World Series ring from 2016, and people are bothering us. It's great. But getting back to his house, all the emotion, all the discipline, his story, he got so emotional talking about his dad and his wife who's passed. And, the things that you need to have to make this book, which I have been hearing nothing but great things back about what a great read it is. All that has to come out. If it doesn't come out, really, there's no reason to write it. I knew it was in there. And I got to tell you something, the thing that has blown me away through this whole process, besides I'm 10 years old on the corner, and then I'm 33 years old writing this article, and then we've been friends all these decades. And he says, let's write the book. And I said, Randy, there's 50 guys in this town that are better writers than I. I'm not a sports writer, John. I'm just a writer. And he says, yeah, but I trust you. That was it. That sealed the deal.
You talk about water in the eyes. I just got it because that is the compliment of compliments when you have the respect and the trust of someone to say that to you. I have to ask you, like you said, he comes here in 66 from the Giants. Of course, Fergie came here in 66 from the Phillies, I think.
Right.
And, like you said, Fergie was in the bullpen, and Fergie, of course, has wrote the forward in this book.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And then just real quick before you ask your question, I'm on the phone with Fergie going over the forward, and he says, John, he says, the thing you got to get across to the readers is that Randy Hundley has the most singular place in baseball history as catching 160 games in that 1 year in 68. Wow. He said, never be broken. It ain't about home runs. For his position, that's unheard of and never will be changed. So,
and that is for sure. Matter of fact, they brought it up this weekend in the Milwaukee series. Exactly. I was listening to those games. We get to Rocher here in 66. There was the progression, like you say, 66, 67, 68, where they give the Cardinals a battle till middle of July in 68. 69 for Huntley. I mean, what did you get from him? Is it, you always wonder, like I always wondered how the 71 Blackhawks felt when they lost to Montreal in Game 7 at Chicago Stadium. How was it for Huntley to go all the way to that game in September to be in first place? Did he elaborate on that season or DeRocher with you, even off to the side?
Oh, absolutely. This is a fairly short read of 200 pages. It could have been 1,000 pages. You got to make it applicable to the reader. I think we were pretty adept at saying a lot in a very short amount of time, which is the way I like to write. But the stuff he talked about, he says, there's a convergence feeling. Teams know when something's starting to come together. That 2016 Cubs team, they were together a few years before this starts gelling. He says, to the average fan, you know, most of us have no idea what that takes and what that means, how long it takes for that to develop. So going back to 1966, you see who they're starting to add. Bill Hands, who was no slouch. They called him Froggy. Froggy had some great, they had some great years. At 69, he had 20 game, I think he was 20 game winner too, or maybe 18. But he pitched over 300 innings that year. So it took a while for the convergence to take place. And he says, you know, and I say this in the book, Randy's first year in 66 was hell because of DeRocher. So he's hailing this trade from the Giants to the Cubs as the best since Gabby Hartnett. Sure. And that's saying a lot.
Yes.
He says, but after about 2 weeks, that was over. And next thing you know, if you can't play for me, Hundley, I'll find somebody else that will. Right. And he addressed everybody that way. And he said, it took me about 2 years to realize what he was doing. He was taking a bunch of raw clay and molding us in his image. And DeRocher was a hell of a ball player.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, he was a flake and a loudmouth. But
when he was with the Gas House gang for St. Louis, incredible. Yeah.
This is not a slouch in any way, shape, or form. So he says it took us almost 2 years to start to go, oh, we see what's going on here. And we talk about that a little bit in the book. You know, one of the things that came up, he talked off record, and I asked his permission to put it in. I said, because his dad was a taskmaster. Hundley's old man was construction worker, Virginia, backbreaker. I mean, this guy was the stud of studs, 5'9", 150 pounds, you know, and you know, walk softly and carry a big stick kind of guy. And he said, because he asked me, I said at one point, did you ever make any comparisons between your dad and Leo? And he sat back, Johnny went, never thought of that. Wow. We spent an hour just on that. So the connections, these things that came up, and he says, in so many ways, Leo, even to Ernie Banks, who was all world at that time, you know, he was hard on everybody. And he says, I don't think we would have ever gotten close to what we achieved in 69 without that push, even though we hated it at the time.
You know what? I mean, great what you just said, to make the comparison to his father, you know, to tell me that, you know, what kind of a stud of a guy he was. I have to tell you, I'm going to jump just into 1970. There was a guy who bought airline tickets for my father here for a short time. We have this travel agency on the Northwest Side. His name was a right fielder named Johnny Callis.
Oh, yeah.
And Johnny would tell my father, he would say, Vince, DeRocher is a hard man to play for. I feel like it's the 1959 White Sox, and I don't know what I'm doing. Now, DeRocher at the beginning of the season tells Callison, you got the second best arm in baseball next to Roberto Clemente, but by midseason, DeRocher is not even playing Callison because he got in Callison's head, like you're saying. He was pushing that same, was he pushing that same button, John, to all those players in 69?
Every single one of them. The things that, I'm going to just say this without getting into details, there were things we decided to omit about how DeRocher address some of the players because it wouldn't have added anything to the story. It would have taken away, and we didn't want to do that. You know, there's been enough written about Leo the Lip. We wouldn't be able to expand on that, but let's just say that for Ernie Banks, for example, as great a player as Ernie was, by the time DeRocher got there, he was coming into the third quarter, almost the fourth quarter of his career.
Right.
So here was a guy who DeRocher admired when he played as a younger man, but inherited basically, and he knew that he couldn't sit him, couldn't trade him. It's Mr. Cub.
Right. So
while his production was up and down, and he was in his late 20s, 30s at that point, early 30s, he was stuck with that. He didn't like that. He wanted new guys to play that he could really push around. I mean, he even got on Yash Kawano, the clubhouse manager. You know, I mean, there wasn't anybody that wasn't spared from DeRocher within 5 feet. I think he still ranks 6th on the all-time list of ejections in baseball. That's pretty good.
Yeah, probably. You are 100% correct. And here's the thing. I know they always say in writings and all these books, like say Miracle Collapse, Rick Talley's book, What You Found Out, everything like that, DeRocher's Cubs. DeRocher would have like 7 or 8 first basemen come out in spring training to get Banks's job.
That's exactly right. And he knew, DeRocher knew that none of them were going to stick, but he wanted to push Ernie. And Ernie wouldn't have any of it. So part of, I think, Ernie's presence was the whole, hey, let's play 2 today and all stuff. That was for the fans. He said, you know, so Randy would always talk about what a presence Ernie was in the clubhouse, much different, very quiet presence on the bench. Wasn't a rah-rah guy. That was for Santo and that was for Beckert and those guys. But Ernie on the bench was this quiet presence. He did all the big smiling. He did all the let's play 2 today. Cubs will shine in 69. Perfect marketing you need to sell tickets. That's exactly how that was. Outside of being a stellar first baseman and went from shortstop to first base and all the gold gloves and the all-star things and stuff. He just always felt that Ernie Banks, that the biggest letdown of that 69 season was not being able to win it for Ernie. All the guys felt that.
Right.
And Ernie said, out of his 19 years in baseball, the 69 season was his favorite. So go figure.
And it still resonates and lives in all of us. I have to ask you, as the athlete and you being the author of the book, and we'll end it here about 69 and move a little bit forward, but does it still sit with him that summer that should have been?
Yeah, you know, it was really hard to get him to talk about it because he's talked about it so much and there's only so many angles you can take, but you could see you know what I would do, John? So sometimes when we're talking about stuff, I'd have my computer out there and I'd show him videotape of the games and things like that. And that play at Shea Stadium, the tag that he made on Tommy Agee that it was called safe on, you know, when I showed him that picture, he just was getting up out of his chair and he's 80 years old. He's ready to go do something about it. Tommy Agee's been dead for like 15 years. And the ump's gone, you know, so he's outlived both of them. But that play in particular, that's actually the first chapter I wrote in the book because of his energy. He got so worked up about that. And I went back and looked at everything and looked at it over and over again. And, you know, a lot of there's some great pictures in the book. I was so happy to be able to find this stuff. Those particular photos of that 69, there it is. He's John right there. Leo right with him. Those images from that 69 game against the Mets, I had to license from Getty, cost quite a few bucks, but they were important. I could have skipped them, but I couldn't, because those images of him jumping up and down and all the Cubs sitting on the bench when they're singing goodbye, Leo. And they're all sitting, I mean, that's priceless stuff. So that was the first chapter I wrote because of his energy around that. He said that was it may not have been the defining moment of the season, it was basically a representation of the season.
Because if they could win that game and go to Philadelphia, which was the next series.
And Philly was a crap team.
Crap team. I have to tell you, that day at La Villa, I'm glad you brought it up because I got goosebumps. I wish you could see my hair right now. I went up to him when you gave everyone that opportunity, a class move by you to have our book signed by Randy. I went up to him, I says, Randy, I got to ask you a question. He goes, go right ahead, John. He goes, That's pretty good. He goes, did you tag Agee? He goes, John, I tagged him so hard that Tommy Agee told me that in the offseason, wherever he saw him. I says, can I just ask you, sir, what did you say to Satch Davidson? Well, he goes, when I heard the crowd in New York go crazy because now he's safe, he said to Davidson, I could bite your head off. And Satch Davidson said to him, well, Randy, if that was possible, that means you would have more brains in your stomach than in your head.
That's exactly
I went crazy when And
the thing about it is he said that was the first and only time that I was better at doing what DeRocher did than DeRocher. DeRocher didn't say nothing. He was just John, but he let Hundley go. The only reason DeRocher went out of there was to make sure that Hundley didn't bump Davidson and get tossed.
Right.
So if DeRocher got tossed, he wouldn't care. But he needed Randy on the field for that. And, you know, there's an interesting thing. Before they went to New York, they were playing the Pirates in Chicago at Wrigley. And he felt was the backbreaker. The Pirates were kind of a so-so team that year. He said, but Willie Stargell, who was the toughest guy he'd ever had to throw a pitch against or call a pitch against, you know, broke a game open in the late ninth inning and they lost. The Cubs lost. He said, so we went into New York dragging. Right. And that the Mets, which has been pointed out not just by us, but also many other writers, you know, the Mets have been platooning their guys all year. They've been sitting guys, resting guys. When we did research for the book, we found out that the Mets players, let's put it this way, the Cub players played 16 more games that year than their guys did in 8 of the starting positions. In Wrigley, in the heat, during the day. It takes a toll on you.
Sure. You know, John, just great insight here again by you to bring up those memories, because I still remember this game on a Sunday afternoon before they went to New York. Instead of bringing in Hank Aguirre, he brings in Regan, who back then I think Leo did have one of these to Regan, because it's all he did was call Phil Regan.
The Vulture.
Regan lays one into Willie Stargell, and I think it's still going on Sheffield.
Yeah, boy, he hammered it.
It was crazy.
And there's also other pieces here. Look, they all this is like a puzzle to me. Looking at that 69 season, there are various factors. There's a lot of things they were right. Nobody stays in first place for 155 days anymore. Maybe Atlanta, I have to check that. But you look at this, and then I think the other thing was the pressure on these guys to go from nothing. They had won games for, I don't know, 30, 28 years before 1966 started rolling around a little bit.
Sure.
Things started building up. So the pressure on these young men in 1969 was enormous. They carried Chicago on their shoulders, and I couldn't even understand what that must have felt like for them. They were superstars. They were superheroes. There was nowhere they could go in Chicago without being pushed on. So to watch that unravel, I think everybody still has PTSD.
Oh, I have to ask you something that I think comes up in the book. And of course, this is your idol, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, he was my idol, and now he's my friend, and I don't know where the middle is anymore.
Well,
but I will tell you before you ask your question, it took me about a month to go, I really get to do this. I really get to write this book with him. I mean, it took about a month to kick in that I could. Look, I got to put the 10-year-old kid aside for a while, and I got to do this work. So it's good.
I mean, you still would say wake up in the middle of the night. I'm going to meet with Hundley tomorrow.
I don't know how many.
This book.
I was telling you about my friend Gary. We played catch in my grandma's backyard. He was at the event that day at La Villa, and we're still friends all these years later. I would call him going, Gary, I can't effing believe I get to do this. Wow. Because we both go all the way back to 1966 playing catch, and I was Randy. I mean, how does that happen? Pretty amazing.
You talk about just that, at the end of the day, you two meet. It's just crazy. I have to tell you, and correct me if I'm wrong, Randy starts the 1969 All-Star game, doesn't he?
He didn't start. Bench started. But he came in the third inning. They put these guys in 3 innings at a time.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, in 1970, I think the first major blow to Randy is against the St. Louis Cardinals, and a journeyman player named Carl Taylor slides into him. And he was laid out. And I was a young boy, 10 years old, 1970. And I'm like, oh, no. There is no possible way they're going to start Ken Rudolph. And then they had to trade for J.C. Martin and Jack Hyatt. But this was, I think, my first feeling of, oh my God, this is the quarterback. And he was not getting up. And I felt, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that he was really never the same as the mobility catcher from that knee surgery with Taylor. Am I correct in saying that?
100% correct, John. Once the knee is done like that, now you got to remember, they don't have all the technical medical stuff we have now. So this was opening him up in the whole drill. And once that stability was gone from him, everybody knew he had a weakness. He needed that knee from his stance to throw. And he had a pretty good percentage of throwing guys out. And as DeRocher said, this cost us 10 to 20 games because he's not behind the plate, calling pitches, hitting home runs, whatever he had to do. And I just found it, that was the beginning of the end of his career. He rehabbed and more knee injuries and shoulder problems. And once that happened, the IRONMAN, there was a chink in the armor a little bit. And he, to this day, is dealing with these things, of course, at his age. Sure. Probably 5 years ago, he did knee replacement, maybe 4 years ago. And, he's had problems with that. And so, yeah, I mean, that was the beginning of the end. I think not just for him, but that team started to unravel a bit. They had some pretty good seasons. They always started out strong. And by July or August, they kind of fell apart.
And I have to tell you, if just to creep into the 1970 with the whole thing with Randy, a gentleman that I interviewed, and you might even know him, William Bike, wrote about the 1970 Cubs. Oh. And he says that the 1970 Cubs actually, if you look at percentage, came a little bit closer that year. The Pirates won the division that year. Right. And he says they had the team because they had they picked up Pepitone, they picked up Mil Pappas, they picked up Tommy Davis. They were making the move.
100%. And, the Mets in 1970, after winning it all, were in third place. They came in third. Their magic was gone. I mean, that's the ebb and flow of baseball. But 100% correct. That 70 team, had he not hurt his knee, I think that's a whole different deal. Fergie was young and strong. Kenny Holtzman, Bill Hands. And interesting, too, these guys, which I've known all along, these guys would routinely go the distance. Holtzman, Jenkins, Hands. They run a 4-man rotation. They didn't have 5 days off. They didn't have specialty pitchers. And Fergie says it in the forward of the book. While they were in rotation, the one constant was Hundley. He was always behind the plate. So even when you're as much as Rudolph filled in or J.C. Martin filled in and John Bacabella would fill in, it's not the same. The rhythm is off. It's a very different deal. So these little nuances in the game change everything.
Exactly. It's like going to LaVille. If they change the pizza maker tonight, that pizza is not the same.
Hey, listen, it's funny you say that because I was just there a couple days ago. Actually, Bob Surratt just did an interview with Randy, and we did it at LaVille because it's easy to get to. And of course, they brought out the sausage and peppers there, brother. So we were good.
Oh God, you're making me hungry. And it's 10 o'clock. No, but I have to tell you, as the years went on with the Cubs, here's another phenomenal thing about him. I mean, just how he was, the passion, the love, and he shows it to you as the friend and everything else now. And the man who writes his book, for me, when he caught the 2 no-hitters in one year for Bert Hooton and Milt Pappas.
Happy Hooton and Milt Pappas. Yeah, I mean.
And in the book, he says that knuckle curve starts out at your head and drops like, a rock.
Yeah. One of the early themes in the book is about Randy coming up in the big leagues, and he had to face Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax back-to-back 2 nights in a row. And the first night, Drysdale throws right at his head, which is the norm. And John, I can't remember the guy's name, who's behind the place for the Dodgers. Johnny Roseborough yells, out of the way, meat. And Hundley's on the floor, bushing himself off. And he said that, and in contrast that, the next night, he's got Koufax with this 12-6 curveball that's unhittable. He rated Hooton's knuckle curve as good as Koufax's curve. That's saying a lot right there. And Hooton never played an inning of minor league ball, ever. So a phenomenon. He went on to great success with the Dodgers. And, of course, Milt Pappas, we all know that. He came within inches and a couple ball calls about, having the perfect game and stuff. And the great story in there is about, Randy having to go settle him down because Bruce Fremming, everybody's favorite umpire, was going to toss Pappas out of the game in the 9th inning because he stepped 3 steps off the mound. So only 4 guys that we could find in the history of baseball have ever caught 2 no-hitters in one season. Randy's one of them.
And Randy's with the game. I mean, just tremendous work.
Yeah.
At this point, John, I want to hold up the book to our audience. We are dabbling on stories of this great book written by my new friend, John St. Augustine. Here it is. It's The IRONMAN, the story of Randy Hundley, the legendary Chicago Cubs catcher, written by the gentleman that's on the Zoom screen here with me today, John St. Augustine, and the foreword in here by Ferguson Jenkins. As John has mentioned in the interview, some unbelievable pictures. Matter of fact, speaking of that no-hitter, I just dabbled on it too, where he was. There's a picture of him sitting.
Oh, him and Milt,
yeah, great picture.
Yeah,
and him hitting a home run in one of the games. And of course, the old Cub Power sticker from the 1969 team, which I love. I think my dad bought 15 of them.
I was going to say, how hard it was to find one that wasn't all beat up and on somebody's bumper still?
Right. And I used to tell my dad, no, Dad, I don't want them on the car. And I don't know. Then he says, well, you're not even using these. And of course, an Italian father, he was always thinking about money.
But I got to tell you real quick about those images. Every one of those came from so many different sources. The Cubs, we were able to draw from their archives. Randy's brother, Ken, actually sent me the early stuff of him and his family. Randy's first purchase when he became a bonus baby with the San Francisco Giants in 1960 was a 1955 T-Bird. We got a picture of that in there. And those early pictures, and then his daughters, Renee and Julie, gave me the pictures of Randy and his wife, Betty, when they got married and stuff. So it really was a, chronological thing. And as great as those are, my favorite image in the book is the one when in 1969, he had to leave training camp at one point and go deal with the IRS. Because in 1960, the IRS said, you can't, Randy had to deal with his dad. His dad was his manager, his agent, and all. This is long before major agents. And they had an oral agreement. And any bonus Randy got, he'd pay his dad half. So in the beginning, the Giants were paying him, and he had a $110,000 bonus. That's huge money back then.
Wow.
He was paid X amount per month or per year. And Randy did I think it was $22,000 was the first year. He gave his dad $11,000. This big money in 1961, right?
God.
11 grand. And Randy claimed that $11,000 as a business expense because he's paying his agent. For 7 or 8 years, the IRS sued him and tried to get him into court. And they finally did. I think it was the 1968 or 69 season. 68, I believe it was. And so he has leave training camp, go to court with his father and his lawyer and his mitt, and for 6 hours squat in the courtroom to show the judge what his dad taught him and how this all worked out. And in the end, the judge ruled in their favor. Said, yeah, this frivolous lawsuit, they throw it out. Randy says, I always wondered if the judge was a bloomin' Cub fan. You never know. So the image in there, though, that ends that chapter, right towards the end of the chapter, there was a great sports cartoonist, and he drew this picture of Randy that's in the book. And I found it online looking, I probably spent 200 hours just online looking at images and things.
Sure.
And I found this image and I thought, my God, this is incredible. And it tied right into the IRS thing and the story. I'm like, how do I use this? So he turns out the guy passed away like 7 years ago. Can't find anything about him. Going through his obituary, John, I find his daughter's name, tracked her down into upstate New York. It took me a month to get a response. And she said, oh my God, my dad would be so proud to have that image in your book. And she gave it to us for nothing. It's fantastic. Yeah.
That is, just fantastic. And again, something like that, John, I always tell people, you can't Google it to find that story. Only radio. Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly, to tell the John St. Augustine. Yeah. I have to tell you, of course, the team unravels by 73. We got to start making changes, and everybody starts getting traded. Was it hard for him to leave Chicago that first time?
Oh, boy. He's younger, but, even then, you think at some point you might be leaving, but he had never felt he was leaving. He was the spark plug. He was Randy Hundley. He was behind the plate.
Right.
And he would probably just retire as a Cub. Well, that didn't happen. And the way he found out, which we didn't put in the book in the beginning, he found out he was going to San Francisco because some relative of his heard it on the radio in Virginia and called him. He didn't even know he was going to the Giants. When he got let go from the Cubs, he was at home listening to the sports on WGN, and he heard that he'd been traded. That's how he found out. Nobody from the Cubs called, no letter in the mail, nothing. So traded is tough. Not being called at all was really hard on him. He was really ahead of time with that.
It's like that kick in the teeth, right?
It really was.
After all these years, you can't call me. And yes, it is in the book, the IRONMAN. Of course, does he wind up? I know he goes to Minnesota, comes back here. Yeah. But John, does he wind up with San Diego?
He played with San Diego for a very short amount of time. He went from Minnesota to San Diego before he came to Chicago. And Minnesota cut him because he had all kind of knee problems again. There's just no way around it. And then he was becoming almost a player coach for these teams. Everybody in baseball knew who Randy Hundley was. We want our catchers to be like you. We want you to work with our pitchers. So I think the Minnesota Twins contract and the Padres contract for sure was a player coach role. They knew he was getting in his mid-30s at this point. You're not going to get a lot of productivity out of the guy with all his knee problems. But interestingly enough, when the Twins let him go, he went to Arizona and said, I'm not done. I want to rehab more. So he gets with this power lifter named John Cole. And John Cole gets to the point where Randy's squatting 500 pounds. His knee's totally rehabbed. The Padres pick him up. He goes out there for a while, and he realized right away, I'm not playing anymore. I'm a coach. I'm helping the pitching staff, which was fine. And he said, when he was let go from the Padres to go back to Chicago, the Padres offered him to be a coach in Hawaii. Wow. And he said, I just wasn't done playing yet. So if he'd accepted the coaching thing with the Padres in Hawaii, he's not back home in Chicago in 76.
Jeez. And, he had, in the beginning, he for what he had left, he gave it his all, and it was just tremendous. In these later years I know he's done some announcing. I saw, all that kind of thing. I did see.
As much as I love the guy, that was really Ron Santo's job, right? You got to put Ronnie in there with Pat. And anybody that knows Hundley and all the ball players and the rest of us that are close were like, he's got great insights on the game, but Dad, for gummit, it may take a half hour to talk about what happened on a play 2 days ago because his speech is so deliberate. So he's as fiery as Santos was. His delivery is just a little different.
Just a little bit. But John, I got to tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you've listened to this. About a couple of weeks ago, I think both of you were at the game when Dunston and Grace went in. And Rick Sutcliffe was kind of being an interim this year. Rick Sutcliffe. And am I off by a lot, or I got a lot of wax in my Italian ears? Sutcliffe sounds like Hundley sometimes.
Well, listen, they're both cut from similar cloth, those two guys. The Red Baron and the Rebel are pretty close. And he does at times have that. That's why he's the color guy. He's not the play-by-play guy. And I think a lot of times, you know, it would have been interesting to have, you know, Ronnie step in as the play-by-play, because he gets so worked up, he needs to burn off some energy. But like we talk about in the book, Randy, you know, is a Christian. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, never curses. He says, "What the rip, Blumen," all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody, you know, ribs him about it, but it's in good nature. And the deal is that he said, "I can't do any kind of beer commercials for you guys." Of course, what are you gonna do with Budweiser at that point? Holy cow, you got to have a Budweiser, right? So that was kind of the end of his broadcasting.
John,
But he suggested Ron, and look how that turned out.
oh, yeah, exactly. I have to ask you as we come getting closer here to the closing of this today.
Which has been great. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh my God, I am honored. I am honored. I can't tell you how much I love this, and we have a camaraderie because of our memories of all this.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, because I know you said when you called up your friend, and I might have sat at that table with a bunch of great people you introduced me to that day. And the way you acknowledged people that day in that restaurant, and all the names of the people that sponsored you in this great.
Yes.
What is, and now that it's out and it's out there and you hear every day from this, and I remember when I came up to you and I said, "Hey, listen, we got to do this interview," and you says, "John, give me a couple of weeks because I'm running on empty."
Yeah.
What goes through your mind now that it's out and everything else? I mean, it's fabulous.
You know the old "I'm the luckiest man in the world" speech?
Yes, Lou Gehrig.
That's how I feel.
Wow.
There is no way that my 8-year-old self and my 10-year-old self and my 33-year-old self and my 47-year-old self would have ever imagined I was the guy to get to do this. All those connect the dots lined up to put me in this position. And when we're sitting there, and you know, here's all the list of the great sports writers in Chicago, and they're formidable. I trust you. You know, and so every day I'd walk in there and I see that red Corvette and I tap it a little bit. I look in the window and I see my face, which is a lot older, but the 10-year-old kid inside me thinks this is the most incredible thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I've had some great success, but this, not much brings up goosebumps like this does. It's fantastic.
Just incredible. 2 things before I let you go.
Sure.
I want to go back to La Villa that day when you asked him.
Don't we all want to go back to
La Villa? I might go tonight. I'm getting hungry. I have to tell you, when you brought him up to the podium, we all stood up. There wasn't, I have to tell you, at the table I was with, there wasn't a dry eye. It was crazy. But you know what? I guess he had found out you know your nickname.
Oh,
and
bring this up.
Yeah. But I love the way he did it. You know, he said,
yeah.
"You know, I had the opportunity here to do this with John," and he goes like this, and the place you became like family with everybody. He goes,
"Yeah,
I mean, Butch."
yeah, that was a
fantastic
thing. I wish my parents could have been there to hear this, because, and I said, I don't know where that nickname came from. I've had it, and I can tell who knows me from where. So in my, grammar school years up to high school, I was Butch. Then I became Augie in high school, and of course John when you write books and stuff. But they're all good with me. But that, he really picked up on that pretty good. It was great.
It was, I mean, a day that no one will ever forget. It was so organized the way you had it going and everything, and the camaraderie with people. I even got a chance to talk to his sister. She told him about his early days growing up in Virginia. Such the nicest people. Just
John, like you said, we had like over 200 people show up, and 30 plus were his family.
Yes,
they came from Virginia. Todd Hundley, great catcher in his own right, 2-time gold, 2-time All-Star. They kind of go back and forth. Todd does not have a gold glove. Hundley does. Randy does. So, they were going back and forth on that. And I got to tell you a little behind the scenes. The Friday night before the event, which was a Sunday, August 20th, I was at his daughter Julie's house, and all the Hundley clan came in from Virginia. And what a hoot this crew is, right? So they made this huge meal, and it was all Southern food. I'm like, they're making me eat this stuff I'd never eaten. It was terrific and wonderful. And Randy's uncle Steve was there. I picked on him a little bit at the event because he was just a great guy. And I just sat back and I thought, and they all came up to me and said, thank you for securing his legacy like you have, because there was nothing. I mean, there's clippings and some statistics, but not between the covers of a book. And I can't say enough about, Julie Hundley, and Renee Hundley and Ken Hundley and Todd Hundley and the whole crew that came out that day. They helped as well set things up. And we have some private book signings coming up, and I know that Julie's going to be bringing them and stuff. I'll get to see them. But it was a once in a lifetime event for me. There'll never be anything like that again.
Exactly. It just was, you didn't know what to expect as being a guest.
Right.
It was just like, I remember texting my wife midway through then saying, listen, I think I'm going to be home around 6. She goes, you're going to stay there for an hour, I have to say something to you. And then I want to leave it with a thing that this is so powerful about you, but you got to promise me a part 2. Because this is fantastic. I'd like to get more into your career.
Sure.
We knew today was designated for the book, but this is fantastic. I mean, you're best-selling author, one of the greatest radio personalities, but this is what defines John St. Augustine. I want to read it. John St. Augustine is one of the most powerful voices in the past century. He encourages people to live their life to the fullest and not to be free of regret. And you know what, John? That Sunday when I met you and this interview today, that is John St. Augustine. Sir, you keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, a guy with a small podcast, this opportunity. This was my Randy Hundley to talk to you.
Well, I really appreciate it, John. Listen, I started in radio, brother, and there were 3 people listening, 2 related to me, and I paid the 3rd one. So I know what it's like. I know what it's like to start. But listen, you're doing the good work and doing the right thing, and you're doing what you think that you need to do to enhance people's lives for the better. I'm all about that. And I know you're going to plug this on your Facebook page. I just want to remind people, and thank you for that accolade. Whoever wrote that, I must owe him some money or something, because that was, I'm like, okay. But the book is available direct from the publisher, lulu.com, LULU.com. You can just put in the search bar, IRONMAN, and the book is there. It's amazing to me. It's starting to ramp up, because Christmas and Cub fans and stuff, we're in the right spot for all that. We're working on the audiobook. That will be out before Christmas. I'm working to get Randy to read the intro himself, which ought to be really interesting. Yeah. And so that book will come alive in audio format before the end of the year as well. So LULU.com, put IRONMAN in the search bar, and you can have your own copy.
And I want you to know, I have the greatest book of all, one signed by Randy right here on the IRONMAN. And of course, the one that I think I'm cherishing the most after today, the one signed by you.
Well, I appreciate that very much, John. Keep up the good work, brother. We'll talk soon.
You got it. Thank you, John. See you down the road.
You got it.
Hey, golden mackerel, no doubt about it. The Cubs are on their way. The Cubs are gonna pitch today. They're gonna hit today. They're gonna field today. Come what may.